Welcome to Spectator TV. I'm Lara Prendergast, the Spectator's executive editor, and the latest edition of the magazine has just gone off stone. To discuss what's in it, I'm delighted to be joined by our deputy editor and editor of our US edition, Freddy Gray, our associate editor, Damian Thompson, and our commissioning editor, Mary Wakefield. This week's cover has the headline, The Fear, and in it, Douglas Murray looks at the rise of anti-Semitism in Britain. So, Freddie, could you start by explaining where this cover came from?
Well, there was obviously the appalling attack in Manchester last week on Wednesday, and that was after we went to press last week. We did last week's edition on Kemi Badenoch and the Tories, and this week has been the Tory party conference, so we needed another subject, and it seems a shame not to address this very important topic because, as Douglas spells out in the piece, it's become increasingly obvious since October 7th that there is a very virulent anti-Semitism that is a sort of toxic mix of Islamist anti-Semitism with far-left anti-Semitism and even a bit of far-right anti-Semitism in Britain too. And these are all combining towards creating a climate where British Jews are feeling increasingly uncomfortable. And I think Douglas spells that out very well. And I think it's a good week to do it.
And Damien, as Douglas points out in his piece, anti-Semitic attacks have doubled since October the 7th, 2 years ago. What do those numbers tell us?
Well, I think we have to go back as far as the 1970s, actually, and think about what we called the Pakistani community. People didn't say the Muslim community when I was young. We thought of people who had come here from the subcontinent, come here from Pakistan mainly, as people from Pakistan, and there was a pejorative P word to describe them, and it was no accident because although we knew they were Muslims, we didn't think of them as the Muslim community. And what happened, to cut a long story very short, I think, is that there was a sort of Saudi-funded, Gulf-funded religious imperialism, which led Pakistanis and people from other Muslim countries who came to Britain in increasing numbers to adopt essentially a sort of Saudi Salafist fundamentalism that was actually quite alien to the village peasant Islam of their home countries. And I've seen it myself in Bosnia, for example. I visited shortly after the war there, and I noticed all these Saudi mosques springing up, Saudi-style mosques, which were totally at odds with the beautiful Ottoman mosques that had been built in that part of the world. So I think the anti-Semitism, or the obsession with Palestine, essentially comes as part of the sort of Middle Eastern colonization of British Islam. And its effects, as Douglas quite rightly observes, are deeply sinister, deeply worrying, and the British establishment has been covering it up for a very long time.
Now, one of the points that Douglas makes too is about the role that universities are playing in all of this. Do you think that they should bear some of the responsibility?
Well, of course they could. I mean, it should. As Douglas points out, people like sort of places like King's College are being heavily funded by Qatar. And I think that generation of academics are possibly the most indoctrinated. I don't know what Damian thinks, but they've actually bedded down into sort of anti-Semitism.
Absolutely.
There's absolutely nothing in their mind that says, I should moderate my students' views or perhaps, explain to them the context. They just urge them on. This is their dream. It's what they've been waiting for.
They cringe and fawn in front of anybody with radical views, and if they're not radical enough, they radicalise them.
Yes, exactly.
Horrible places, and the London University, places like SOAS.
Yeah, people of all...
Essentially race hatred.
Yeah, and it's amazing, isn't it? It sort of seems to cross socioeconomic divides. So you've got, the Muslim community here. Yeah. You've also got middle-class white students.
Oh, God, the Trustafarians love putting on the...
we should get into was it keffiyeh? We should get into the keffiyeh business.
Love it.
I mean, there's a huge...
Because they look really cool in it, yeah.
And there's a lot of sort of, middle-aged men teaching at SOAS who also have the keffiyeh kind of...
Well, and I think something I probably should have said at the beginning is that, this week is the second year anniversary of October 7th, those attacks. And the way in which that sort of anti-Israeli, anti-Semitic, Islamist sentiment has spread across society into parts of Britain that you just wouldn't expect. I've been at dinner parties where I've heard people who I just would never expect to espouse anti-Semitic views, just suddenly coming out with them. And I think this is because of October 7th. It's because of the strange sort of nuclear reaction that followed among people in Britain about it, and this strange sort of hatred of Israelis for their obsession with October 7th. You know, people now say, "Oh, stop boring on about October 7th," as though it was nothing. And, you know, pointing towards the war in Gaza, and I think there's, plenty of good points to be made about how terribly Israel has handled the war in Gaza. But that does not mean that you have to say that October 7th was some sort of reason to celebrate. And as Douglas says in the piece, there were celebratory marches in Britain in the immediate wake of the October 7th attacks.
Yeah.
But it is a fascinating phenomenon that both here and in America and around the world, support for Israel among young people is so low. And, well, you can talk about a rising tide of anti-Semitism, and there's a lot of evidence for that. Though I think it's a different type of anti-Semitism from the anti-Semitism of decades ago. I think it's more political, more conspiratorial, has maybe more in common with a sort of Russian anti-Semitism of the protocols than it does with a sort of genteel, rather nasty, snobbish, Aunt Jews pushy type anti-Semitism.
But those two things
kind
have
died out.
collided, haven't they?
They
What's
have
interesting
collided.
is the
But
two
also
streams of anti-Semitism.
I want to make the point that people really are utterly horrified by the scenes by what's happening in Gaza.
Yeah.
And, I don't think you can brush that off. I really don't.
But very few people are watching more than one sort of source of information. So if you're watching what is...
Yeah, but there's no real way of spinning, some of those photographs.
No,
I agree
completely.
that some of the photographs are fabricated.
Just you won't have looked at the October 7 attacks in detail if you're spending a lot of time looking at the appalling situation in Gaza. People don't have the time or the patience to look at things in the round.
Indeed.
And it's boring.
You just have to see there's an extraordinary live film of people, the kids at the rock festival.
Yeah.
Being mowed down.
Yeah.
So October the 7th apologists are absolute scum.
Yeah.
I agree with you. But I do want to make the point that Israel's actions in Gaza have, it's just a matter of fact, seen the most extraordinary erosion of support for Israel among, for example, American conservatives. And that is now leading in a very sinister way into anti-Semitic, conspiratorial, apocalyptic tropes. I warned about this in an article in the Spectator the other day, saying, this talk of the Antichrist, which is linked to Gaza, which is linked to the assassination of Charlie Kirk, all of this is profoundly unhealthy.
I suppose the kind of overriding idea in Douglas's piece is the sense of kind of moral and spiritual drift. And Mary, you've written this week about the arrival of our new Archbishop of Canterbury, Sarah Mullally.
Yes.
In the context of this new question around bioethics. Could you talk a bit about, first of all, your piece and also your thoughts on Mullally?
Right. Well, this is a whole new, I think, kind of satanic development. This was just the news that scientists in Oregon, I think, have now announced that they can make a baby using skin cells. So I can't really go into the kind of science of it, but you instead of having a human egg and a human sperm, you take basically information from a skin cell. You persuade the skin cell in some way to drop half its chromosomes, which means it looks like a kind of sex cell, like a sperm or an egg, which, as you know, only has 23 chromosomes, and then you can fertilize it. So this was announced as a potential cure for women with sort of dodgy eggs, but also, which I think is extremely significant, the first time in human history you could have a child born of two people of the same biological sex. So two men can have a baby with their own genetic material, no woman involved. And I seem to be the only person I can find who's actually worried about this, because for me it seems like this is the first time in human history you've really erased motherhood. And I don't think you have to have your own child to feel desperate about this and to feel like a child born who asks the question, where is my mother? And is told you just didn't have one, you were born from a skin cell, is a terribly sad thing. So that for me it's a very worrying issue amongst all the other worrying issues.
And you mentioned at the end of your piece that you'd like Mullally to give some guidance on this. Do you think we're likely to see that?
I don't know. I mean, Damian's better placed than me to say if she'll offer moral guidance, but I think it's the first time, for me it was a happy coincidence. It's the first time we have a mother, obviously, first female Archbishop of Canterbury, at the same week as this news is announced that we will have entirely motherless children. And I had hoped that she might be the person to call this out, to say what a tragedy it would be.
I think she's quite difficult to read. I mean, it's perfectly true that she has this very impressive background as a nurse. She became chief nursing officer for England and Wales. And she did speak out against her sister dying. On the other hand, she's pro-choice. She's in favour of wide access to abortion.
Well, she said she was pro-life for herself, didn't she?
Yeah, I mean, that's a sort of
Seems a bit
auto-libertarianism. I've got no time for that.
Yeah.
I do actually think, this will be an unpopular view and no man is supposed to be allowed to express it, but I do actually think that the ready acceptance of legal abortion and the sort of mission creep of the abortionists is something that has made possible this separation of motherhood and the child. I think it's part of the fact. I like the point you made about one of the worrying things is that women or, men, I don't really understand the embryology of it, but, this will be a child as an accessory.
Yeah. Oh, it's all about the appetite. And in fact, what was fascinating is in every outlet that reported it, it was about, this is great because you might want better eggs or two men might want a child. No one...
I know you mentioned that the Catholic Herald described it as a scientific breakthrough.
I know, I was
That's a
depressed
new
about that.
low for that wretched publication.
But, it's a cliche to say, what about the children? It's almost embarrassing, but, it is worth thinking about it from the perspective of a child and whether you want to create that reality.
I think Mary and Damian are being very open-minded towards Mullally.
I think she might be quite good.
I think you're very fair-minded.
I think she's quite nice, and I think she'll be quite popular, actually. Because, look, Rowan Williams, greatest intellect, Anglican intellect of his generation, useless Archbishop of Canterbury. Justin Welby, massively clever, deluxe education, Eton and Trinity, Cambridge, background sitting on the board of an oil company in the city. Everybody thought he was going to be a fantastic manager. He turned out to be a management freak who spouted lefty platitude. Sarah Mullally, no great brain, probably. I don't know, who am I to say? But she seems to get on well with the clergy in her diocese. It may be that a vein of common sense and compassion emerges, because I don't think that the British people care about having a woman archbishop. I mean, I think on the whole they're pleased they've got a woman archbishop. They're not interested in the Oxford movement. Didn't have an effect on rural England or your average Anglican. I think they're perfectly happy. The Anglo-Catholics will twist themselves into a pretzel over it, but then the Anglican Union will die. But it's already dead.
That's it. It's an impossible job because you're leading over an Anglican communion that's in terrible trouble.
Yeah.
And you can forget about it. It was just a ridiculous attempt, very late in the day, to let's have our own version of the Catholic Church. What matters is the Church of England, and I don't think the Church of England we know the Church of England doesn't really, on the whole, have a problem with women bishops. And if Sarah Mullally, which I'm not sure that she will, but if she can bring out a vein of common sense and compassion and speak firmly on moral issues, and it's a big if, then I think people will like her, because it'll just be a relief after the sort of whiny managerialism of Welby. And
as our leader says in this week's issue,
here, Freddy.
as our leader, I'm trying to keep it on the issue that we're talking about, off stone. It's called. In our leader, we point out that I think the first paragraph says the least interesting thing about her is her sex. I'm not sure I agree with that necessarily, but I think it's a fair point. But it also says that and it's a very conventional point to make about the Anglican Union or the Church of England. Both, is that the areas that are thriving, much like in Catholicism, much like in evangelical Christianity, are the areas that take faith very seriously and are interested in biblical study, prayer, commitment, devotion, things like that. And to me, she does not scream like somebody that's going to promote that.
Yeah.
I may be wrong. I'd be happy to be proved wrong.
Welby was supposed to be the HTB candidate, wasn't he? So we all thought that's...
If only, actually, I think. We didn't see any of the dynamism of HTB.
Yeah, yes, so you never can tell.
No, you never can tell. And that's what we always say when we have a new pope in the Catholic Church, is that, don't judge him by what he's been before, because when a pope becomes a different person and so on. I'm not sure that's always the case. I mean, I thought it was fairly obvious which way Pope Francis was going to go on key issues.
If we bothered to look into his past, we'd have discovered that he was a villain.
Well, you did early on.
Well, yeah,
that's how I knew, because I was reading you.
Did they? I kept pointing out that one horrible case after another in which he'd behaved despicably, backstabbing away. The Cardinals didn't know about this when they elected him. Anyway, that's my hobby horse. Let's not get on to Francis. He's dead now.
Yeah. Should we move across the Atlantic? Because another cause for hope is our new New York office, which is Dawn Freddy. You are the editor of the US edition. Can you talk us through what's going on over there?
Well, you've written an excellent notebook about it. Thank you very much this week. Well, we had a party last week. Was it Tuesday night? I'm still sort of jet lagged, so I'm a bit confused. In New York, to sort of, announce ourselves. We've got this new office in New York. It's wonderful. It's on the top floor of a building on Fifth Avenue.
Are we invited to pop in if we're in town?
Of course, yeah. I think I am too. It was. I think I'd say the party was a big success, and I think Spectator in America, we've had a sort of small presence there for a while now. I think it has been growing slowly, and I think hopefully now we're in the sort of mode to go into another gear and really make a big success of it. And I think, the feedback I've been getting on our recent issues is pretty good, and the mood in America is just sort of, well, it's quite strange, particularly in New York, I felt, because sort of, you go to Washington, you go to other parts of America, there's all the talks about the Trump revolution. In New York, all they're talking about is Mamdani, the soon to be, surely, it seems, inevitably, the next mayor of New York. And New Yorkers are in despair about it because New York's been having such colossal economic success, if you happen to be well off to begin with. You have a kind of super rich in New York now who are so rich, and they are suddenly worried that this mayor is going to come in, elected by privileged people who are...
These students again.
They're privileged people who are just annoyed that they are not as privileged as they felt their upbringing would enable them to feel. And that's a large part of Mamdani's support. Of course, he's got other support. He's got support because of Palestine and so on.
And he's clever.
And he's clever, and he's very good at marketing himself on social media. And he's he's got this sort of brand that really works on the modern left. But New Yorkers are quite depressed about that. So I think the contrast between what's going on in New York and what's going on in the rest of America, New York defying Trump, other cities defying Trump. We see Chicago at the moment is kind of, looking like it might become quite similar to a war zone like you've seen in Portland. Anyway, I could bore on forever about America. It's always fascinating.
But, all these cities are basically dumpster fires to start with, defying Trump. Good luck with that. It's a bit
unfair on Chicago.
Yeah, Chicago is.
But no, not Chicago, but Portland, or look at what's happened to San Francisco. My God, those Democrat mayors really do know
I
how
love
to...
Gavin Newsom.
Do you?
Not really, but he's just fabulous.
His attempts to meme are so embarrassing compared to Trump's genius sombrero routine. And then Gavin Newsom comes along, and when the Democrats try it...
It's just how shameless he is.
Very cringe.
I know. But it's doing really... he's now got sort of 500,000 followers, and this is considered a metric of
Well, he
success.
looks good, doesn't he?
He does not.
Oh, he looks good in the way that,
No, he looks
got
awful.
that
He looks like a sort of, someone in women's reproductive health. He's got that sort of creepy...
He's got a sort of
consultant.
slickness, and
I think it's just amazing how shameless he is, He did used to read out Clinton's speeches in the Mirror, and he bought all the same suits, and he became Clinton, and now he's becoming Trump in a really weird way. All his facial expressions have changed, and his foundation has gone orange.
His greatest moment was when the fires were happening in LA, terrible fires in LA, and he did all these interviews, and he was just there in front of,
looking over the fire in some sort
What I loved was that horrible reporter from one of the lefty networks. I can't remember who it was, what his name was, but he's this reporter who really prides himself on his buff, fit physique, and there he was with cars and houses burning down behind him. And when he turned around, you could see that he had clipped, and he was wearing a fireman's uniform for some reason, a fireman's yellow jacket. He had clipped in the jacket to emphasize his physique. As he turned around, you saw the clip.
Yeah,
but
very,
I just say, I think
Newsom.
the Spec in America would be a big success because...
Thank you, David.
Big brown-nosing moment come out, but every so often a journalist arises, a British journalist arises, who can really take the temperature of American politics, who can see it with fresh eyes and also with tremendous wit. And in previous generations we've had, I think Gerald Baker is very good, but in the next generation, it's the Fredster, as we
do
call him. Nobody writes more perceptively about American politics.
Yeah, it's
including
very
Americans,
exciting.
may I say.
Yeah, and
Let's
firstly, everyone
move
seemed
on.
very excited about our arrival there. Talking of charm offensives and charm in general, very sadly, obviously, this week, Jilly Cooper died. And Rachel Johnson has written about her relationship with Jilly. She knew her quite well. Mary, were you a big Jilly Cooper fan?
Huge Jilly Cooper fan. It was what counted as sex education for my generation, reading Jilly Cooper. And it was great. We learned all sorts of things from her that today's youth has forgotten, I think. Like, not every hand on your knee is a criminal offence. Some might be quite welcome in Jilly Cooper land. And in reality, I'm not encouraging anyone to put their hands on my knee at this point. No, she was wonderful and funny and great and a huge part of childhood, if you're my generation.
I have only read one Jilly Cooper book, and I have read it about 3 times. But it's her book on class, which was published in the mid-1970s, and utterly brilliant. She has a character for each stratum of the British class system. So there's a character, the lower middle class couple called Brian and Jen Teal, and they have little doily covers for their toilet paper. And she's just so benevolently cruel in explaining the different words for different bits of the, different rungs of the class ladder have, and the different ways they pronounce words. Delicious book to read. And although it was written in the mid-1970s, it
remains
actually,
true.
Oh my goodness, it's so perceptive.
Do you know why she thought that people weren't having as much sex now as they used to in her youth? She says it's the obsession with exercise, and I think that's a very interesting point. She says the more people exercise and put on, their lycra and take it seriously, the less actual sex they have. I think that's,
So the gym is full of incels,
Yeah.
basically. Oh, okay.
Just finally, I wanted to ask you about Flora Watkins' piece. She has written about her toxic relationship with her Range Rover. She's specifically talking about a discovery.
Yeah.
She's talking in general about all of the
I
difficulty
love
getting
an
parts of
old-fashioned
them.
Land Rover. I think in a Jilly Cooper way, it denotes sort of rugged masculinity that we need to have back. If I saw a man coming in an old-fashioned Land Rover, I'd instantly fancy them.
I had to Google the Discovery 4, which Flora Watkins mentioned. It is a Range Rover Discovery 4, isn't it?
It's not the old-fashioned Land Rover.
It's not the one you're thinking
No.
of, which evokes kind of rugged country army
Lovely.
people.
There are different levels of Range Rover and Land Rover.
But I'm very suspicious of anyone who has a Land Rover or a Range Rover. I think it's a sort of
I've got a Land Rover.
strange. Okay, well, that's exactly my point. Exactly. I think I find obviously everybody hates people in London with Range Rovers because it's very obnoxious. But I also feel it's a certain type of person who is trying to tell you that they are well off.
Is it just because you can't afford one,
grim way.
Freddie?
Oh, I mean, I'm sure it's linked to me not being able to afford one, but I can't drive either. So
Really? Can you
not?
No,
Now we're
so
getting
that's
to
so
it.
I hate all.
So why not? Because I have the distinction of having failed my driving test 3 times and given up. But also, I'm sorry to say, having acquired a drink driving conviction many, many years ago.
Without
One
a
of the
license?
reasons-
Without a
a
license.
That's
Which made
That
things
is-
worse.
quite
And
cool.
it ended up, oh my God, it was embarrassing. I was religious affairs of the correspondent of the Telegraph. I mean, it's 1991, okay. Doesn't excuse it. I've been drinking with Paul Goodman of all people. I was very embarrassed and everything like that. And then the next day, one of the old hands from the newsroom said, "Hello, Damian, how was your day off?" I said, "It was okay," parking the memory, as it were, of what had just the humiliation, richly deserved humiliation. He said, "Yeah, it was an expensive one, wasn't it?" And I thought, how the hell did you know that? And there was a little bit in the Sun newspaper, journalist joke. I had said it was intended as a joke. God knows why, it cost him £1,000. And the news editor of the Telegraph said, "You idiot, why didn't you tell me you were up for that? I could have kept it out of the Sun, mate." Okay, am I forgiven?
Absolutely. Mary, Damian, Freddie, thank you very much for joining.